Hello and welcome to a video on fibermesh. In this video I want to discuss some of the major factors that you need to be aware of when you start creating fibers in ZBrush. So let's first take a look at the first factor, which I consider is your polygon count. So you notice this particular model has 1.3 million polygons. So if I turn on polyframe mode, you can see how many polygons there are on this model. This becomes important when you start using masking, or when we start diving into our fibermesh palette. There'll be particular sliders that you want to be aware of based on the number of polygons you have. So let's also take a look at polygrouping, because that becomes really important and really key when you start to create fibers, whether it be hair or vegetation or just using it to create other parts of some kind of geometry, and you want to use the fibermesh to do that. So there's a new feature in the polygroup subpalette that I really like to use to get some polygroups. So I'm going to walk down to the lowest level, and I'm just going to start masking off portions of the mesh where I want a new polygroup. And then I'm just going to click on Control W, and you can see that ZBrush automatically creates a polygroup based on the masking. So what I'm doing here is, in our polygroups section, there's a new group mask and then clear mask. So I'm using that shortcut. So as you see here, it's Control W. So this is the same thing as saying group mask, but if I was to do a group mask, so if we start painting this way and then we just click on group mask, you can see that the mask inverses, but we still get the polygroup. Whereas the other option, we're going to mask off just a portion of this, and then I can click this or use my shortcut again, Control W, and we'll get a new polygroup. Okay, so these polygroups are going to come in handy when we start to taking our fibers and we want to groom it and we want to change it. So let's take a look at why I've walked down to the lowest subdivision level. So I'm going to mask off the entire mesh, and I don't want any fibers in the front of his face here. I want this, and I don't want any fibers here. And this looks pretty good. This is what I'm looking for. Okay, so a lot of times I'll be sitting on a lower polygon count, because when I blur this mask, what's going to happen is, where there is not so much an intense masking, unlike here where it's 100%, but in here it's not 100%, when we go to create our fibers, the fibers are actually going to be shorter in this area than in here, and there'll be less of the fibers. So you'll get that nice transition that you're looking for in fibers. So let's go ahead and create that. So you can see in this example, and here we'll put a little color here into our fibers so you can really see that. So we'll make them brown and maybe give them a little red base. Okay, so you can see that there are fewer fibers through this area, and they are a lot smaller in this area than this area, just because of the masking that we've done. I'm going to hide the mask really quick, so we're just looking at only fibers. So the next factor that we want to take a look at is how many fibers are we creating. So that's what this slider does right here. So this is set in the thousands. So if I begin to knock this down and I put this at 0.1, I'm telling ZBrush to make 100. So you can see it made 100 fibers, but pay attention that it also has 800 vertex points. So why such a drastic difference? So when we start changing this, you're going to see I got a little over 20,000, but I have 160,000 vertices. The reason why this is happening is the next contributing factor of how you want your fibers to react or be along the surface, and this is also key if you really want to start grooming your fibers a lot, and that's down here at the bottom, which is your segments. So you can see by default the segments are only set to 3. But you watch, if I start setting this up, so I put it at 10, you can see that the fibers kind of now lay flat a little bit more, because there's more polygons per fiber. So in essence, I'm saying each fiber to have 10 polygons. So we want to have more segments, especially if we want to start grooming it, because the more segments I have, the easier it's going to be for grooming, and also I can get a different effect with more segments. So we can start changing our segments, and you can see how much you can really change the look of your fibers just changing your segments. And then of course I'm going to need more fibers than this, so for the sake of the video we'll just go up around 40. And so this is what we have. The next factors that you want to take a look at, the next sliders that you want to take a look at, is this row right here. So you have a by mask and you have a by area. So this is by area is going to go back to our polygon count. So remember, if I turn on my polyframe mode, okay, you'll see that I have larger polygons in certain areas, and there's smaller polygons, or more dense. There's more density of polygons here than, say, probably in the back of our head, like there. Okay? So the by area is actually looking at this and is setting how many fibers and the length and the thickness that you're going to get based on the size of your polygon and density. So if I was to turn this completely off, you see you're going to get it completely looking different result for your fibers. So the next thing I want you to take a look at is we made those polygroups. So why does that become so important for us? Well, that becomes really important for us when we start turning on this feature below here, which is our fast preview. You can see once you turn this fast preview on, the fibers themselves take on the polygroups below. So this becomes really handy when you start grooming pieces that you want to edit or adjust. So let's go ahead and let's create these fibers just so you can see how we can manipulate the fibers because of our polygroups. So now, because I have a polygroup, I can just narrow down to one portion of our fibers. I can even inverse that selection and say I don't want those fibers to be there. Or I can eliminate these fibers too, and this is all I'm looking to have. So you can see how much control you can have. So if I want to groom just a certain portion of this, so let's switch to one of our grooming brushes. I'm going to go ahead and grab the groom hair long, and I'm going to go to a bigger brush size. I'm going to make sure I'm coming out of symmetry mode, because I like to be out of symmetry mode when I'm grooming, so then I can start manipulating and adjusting just only these fibers. And of course, when I bring everything back, they're all the same, but these fibers are not. So this is a great example of a way you can use polygrouping to be able to adjust certain parts of your fibers or your hair that you want to adjust, and then bring everything back. So that becomes a very important contributing factor. Let's go ahead and go back to our model, turn off that one we created, and let's turn our preview back on. The next important contributing factor that I want you to be aware of is this profile slider. So I'm going to drop the number of fibers down. Let's go down to the 200 so we can take a look at this. You can see that the fibers have a nice little twist to them. So that's what this slider is doing. It's creating that twist. You can see when I turn it off, we just get straight, nice, smooth fibers. So I like to have a little bit of twist in my fiber, so we'll just add a little bit there. This way you can also see the segments that are being created. Okay, so what's important to our profiles? If I start putting up this profile, ZBrush is going to give you a warning. I'm just going to say go ahead, yeah, let's do that, and skip the warning. So with profiles at 4, you can see what happens is the fibers become more of like a cube being extruded, which is great, but then what you're going to lose is the rendering capability features that you have with the fibers. So you can see right down here in this section, we have now rendering capabilities. And you can see that sides and radius are turned off or grayed out. And that's because we have our profiles higher than 1. So if I know I'm going to create fibers that are going to be rendered within ZBrush and the BPR renderer, and I'm creating hair or fur, I would strongly recommend to keep your profiles at 1. This way we have these two capabilities, which is sides and radius. And all sides is the exact same thing as profile. So when we go to render this out, you're going to see we get the same thing that we did when we turned the profile slider to 4. The unique difference will be because we have the subdivision level capability in our rendering options, you can see we get smooth extruded cubes. So you can see why you'd want to keep the profile 1, because I want the capability to adjust this and put this, maybe I want it to only be 2 sides because it's not going to be cubes. I want it to look more like hair would. So now when I render it out, you can see I get nice smooth planes. So now if we take these into consideration and let's put some more fibers on our guy, you can see the result we have, and then I can control at render time how I want those fibers to look. Now we have many more factors when you're looking at trying to get a good render, which we'll be covering in another video of using the lighting and material information when rendering it out. But you can see when I go ahead and render this out, you'll see the difference now that we can have because I still have all the capabilities in that little rendering section of our fiber mesh. So you can see here in this final render how much our fibers are going to change because of the settings that we're using within this section right here. So these are our rendering sections. Take note that if we go back to that mesh that we've been editing on with our polygroups and we make some changes to, that our render settings are still available. So even after the creation process has been done, which is all these features up here, we're still able to manipulate and change our rendering options for when we're going to render our fibers. And those are some major key features that you want to take a look at when you start creating fibers and figuring out what you want to do. Thank you for watching this video, and please continue to watch more on pixologic.com.